Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in my life, I was truly alone in a space that was completely mine. I took a slow breath, letting the quiet settle over me. The apartment was small, simple, but it was mine. No one else's. I could already feel the weight of freedom in the air. There were no expectations, no demands, just the calm hum of my own thoughts. It wasn't much. The walls were bare, the furniture was basic, a secondhand couch I had found for cheap, a coffee table I built myself, and a bed that was still wrapped in its plastic. But it was perfect. I wasn't a stranger here. It felt like a fresh start, the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could define myself without anyone else's influence. I walked around the room, letting my fingers brush the edge of the couch, feeling the coolness of the floor beneath my feet. I opened the small window, letting the sounds of the city creep in, cars honking, people laughing, a distant dog barking. There was something beautiful in that noise. It wasn't intrusive, just a reminder that the world was still turning out there. And for once, I was part of it. I didn't have much to unpack, just a few boxes with the essentials, clothes, some books, a couple of dishes. But as I pulled the boxes out of the corner and began to arrange things, I could feel it. The space was filling with a part of me. This was my place, my choices, my life. I smiled to myself, feeling proud. I was doing it. I was standing on my own 2 feet. The stillness was interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. It was sharp, loud, and a little too eager. I froze. Who could it be? I hadn't invited anyone, and certainly no one knew where I was living yet. I made my way to the door, checking through the peephole. My heart skipped a beat when I saw them standing there. My father, my stepmother, and their 2 kids standing in a line like they had planned this entrance. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to open the door, to pretend like it wasn't strange, like everything was normal. But then I saw it in their eyes, expectation. My father smiled, his usual confident grin. "We thought we'd drop by and see how you're settling in." Hi, Dad," I said, pulling the door open slightly, just enough to peek my head out. "What's up?" Callie, my stepmother, shifted nervously behind them, a subtle tension in the way she held herself. Jeremy, my younger brother, clutched a diaper bag like it was his lifeline, eyes wide with uncertainty. "We were thinking of staying the night," my father said, as though it was an afterthought, like I was always open to that idea. "We figured it'd be nice to spend time together now that you're on your own. Right, kids?" Jeremy nodded enthusiastically, already stepping forward, as if he didn't need an invitation. I blinked, taking a moment to process. The words didn't make sense. "Wait, what? Stay the night?" Callie, sensing the discomfort in the air, tried to step in with her usual soothing tone. "Oh, sweetie, we just thought it'd be nice, you know? A little family reunion. We're all in town, and it's been so long since we've all been together." I'm sorry, but I wasn't expecting." I started, but they were already stepping past me, as if they assumed they could walk in. Before I knew it, my father had already taken his shoes off and was heading for the couch, dropping down like he owned the place. Callie followed behind, ushering the kids in. Jeremy ran straight for the living room, tossing his diaper bag on the floor, looking for toys. My mouth went dry. I stood frozen, caught between confusion and anger, watching as my family turned my peaceful space into something else entirely. They were already making themselves comfortable, acting as though they had every right to be there. "Sorry," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "but you can't stay here. My father glanced at me, his expression shifting. "Come on, Sarah, don't be like this. We're family, aren't we?" The tension in my chest tightened. Family. They were treating this like it was just another visit to their house. They weren't asking for permission. They weren't respecting my space, my new life. I swallowed hard, forcing a calmness into my voice. "This isn't your house. I don't have room for—" But before I could finish, Callie's voice floated over, smooth and calculating. "Oh, we've already brought some things. Jeremy needs his nap, and we figured we could just crash here. It'll be fun, won't it?" Fun! The word felt like a slap across my face. I opened my mouth to protest, but no sound came out. I didn't know what to say anymore. My father's voice broke the silence. "Come on, Sarah, don't be rude. Let us stay. It's been a while since we've had a chance to relax as a family." That's when I realized it. I had crossed some invisible line, and they were now making themselves at home. The weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I was suffocating in my own space, And the worst part was that I hadn't even realized it until now. My heart raced, and I could feel my body tensing, but I held my ground. This was my apartment, my life. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me like they had done for so many years. With a deep breath, I met my father's gaze. Number. This is my place. You can't stay here. I didn't invite you. For a split second, his eyes hardened, and I saw the flash of frustration cross his face, but I didn't back down. I was done being the accommodating daughter who always said yes. This time, I was saying no. And for once, it felt good. Callie's face dropped, the smile vanishing. But Sarah, I said no, I repeated, stepping back into the apartment and closing the door with finality. They stood on the other side for a moment, the silence hanging thick in the air. I could hear my father muttering something under his breath, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let them make me feel guilty for setting boundaries anymore. I locked the door, leaning back against it, and took another deep breath, letting the quiet of the apartment wash over me. For the first time since I had moved in, I felt like I had control. I stood frozen, the door cracked open just enough for me to peer at my family standing in the hallway. My father, always so confident, smiled that familiar smile, the one that meant everything was going exactly how he planned it. Callie, my stepmother, lingered nervously behind him, wringing her hands as though she didn't know quite what to do with herself. Jeremy, my younger brother, stood beside her, his diaper bag clutched in both hands like it was the most important thing in the world. The sight of them standing in the entryway of my apartment didn't feel like a visit. It felt like an intrusion. My first instinct was to close the door and pretend I hadn't seen them, but I couldn't. They were family, and family had a way of making you feel guilty for wanting a life outside of their reach. My father looked at me with his usual knowing expression. We were thinking of staying the night, Sarah, just for a little while, you know? My heart stuttered in my chest. What? Stay the night? Callie smiled apologetically, but it was the kind of smile that didn't match her nervousness. Oh, sweetie, we thought it would be nice. A little family time. It's been so long since we've all been together. I blinked, trying to process what they were saying. But I started, but my father brushed past me, moving into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Jeremy followed quickly, already tossing his diaper bag onto the couch. This is a nice place, my father said, his voice full of that same critical tone he used whenever he was scrutinizing something. He turned to Callie, then back to me. But where are we going to sleep? I felt a tightness in my throat. I didn't plan for you to stay. But my father was already walking around, inspecting the space as though it were a hotel room. Well, this is a little smaller than I imagined. I guess we'll just make do. I stood there, the door half open, feeling the weight of their presence in my tiny apartment. They hadn't even asked if it was okay. It was like they just assumed they could walk in and make themselves comfortable. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to speak, my voice calm but firm. Dad, I said, swallowing hard, you can't just assume you're staying here. This is my space. I didn't invite you. Callie, looking more uncomfortable by the minute, took a step forward. But Sarah, honey, we just thought it would be nice to spend time together. The kids are excited to see you. They love spending time with Aunt Sarah. Callie, I don't have room for you all, I said, my voice a little sharper now. This is a one-bedroom apartment. It's not meant for a whole family to just drop in. My father's face darkened, and I could see the frustration start to build in his eyes. Sarah, come on, this is ridiculous. We're family, right? We should be able to spend time together. I crossed my arms, standing my ground. I said no. This is my space, and you can't just come in here and take over. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your safety net anymore. My father glared at me, a flash of anger passing through his gaze. But before he could speak, Callie stepped in, trying to calm things down. Sweetheart, the kids were so excited about this. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? My younger brother, Jeremy, who had been mostly quiet, tugged on Callie's sleeve. But I want to stay at Aunt Sarah's. She's fun. His little voice was so hopeful, and for a second, I almost wavered. But then I saw the way my father was watching me, like I was the problem for not accommodating them. And that was when I felt it. This was exactly the kind of manipulation I had dealt with my whole life. No, I said again, this time more firmly. I'm not doing this anymore. This is my life, my choice. And if you don't respect that, then maybe we shouldn't be spending time together right now. The tension in the room was thick. My father's frustration simmered just beneath the surface. But Callie seemed to recognize that there was no getting past me. She stood there, her face pale, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air. After what felt like an eternity, my father finally spoke, his voice low and edged with annoyance. Fine, but don't expect us to come running when you need us. He turned away, signaling that he wasn't going to argue anymore. We'll leave. Callie hesitated for a moment, casting a glance between my father and me. She opened her mouth to say something, but closed it again. Instead, she simply took Jeremy's hand and turned toward the door. I stood there, watching them leave, my heart still pounding in my chest. But as the door clicked shut behind them, the silence in my apartment felt like a victory. It was mine, my space, my choice. And for the first time in my life, I didn't apologize for asserting that. I had drawn a line, and I wasn't going to let them cross it. I sat down on the couch, the weight of everything that had happened settling into my bones. It had only been a few days since I'd closed the door on my father, Callie, and the kids, but already everything felt different. More quiet. The apartment, once a blank slate, was beginning to feel like a place where I could finally breathe. But as I sat there, I couldn't stop thinking about the years that had led me here. The years of giving, of sacrificing, and of never once asking for anything in return. I remembered the times when I was a little girl, sitting on the edge of the couch in our old house, watching as Callie's voice filled the room with sharpness. I had learned early on that my needs didn't matter, not as much as hers did. When I was 10, I'd gotten a new bike for Christmas. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine, something I had worked hard for. I remember pedaling it down the street feeling like the luckiest kid alive. But a few days later, I overheard Callie talking to my mom. Sarah has a new bike, she had said, her voice heavy with thinly veiled jealousy. I think it's time for us to get something for Jeremy. You know, something better. I could still hear her voice in my head, the way she made everything sound like a crisis, how everything in the world seemed to come back to her and her needs. And there I was, the invisible daughter who just kept giving, kept accepting, kept believing that what I did mattered. But it didn't. Not to them, not when it came to Callie. I had always taken the back seat, quiet and unnoticed, doing what I had to do to keep the peace. I remember the countless nights I'd slept on the living room floor, the cold tile digging into my back while Callie and Jeremy slept comfortably in the bedrooms. My parents didn't even notice. They didn't care. Callie's needs always took precedence. My own small victories, getting into college, landing a part-time job, managing to pay for my books, were brushed aside, overshadowed by Callie's constant crises. It wasn't until much later, in my final year of college, that I realized how deeply ingrained this pattern had become. I had always sacrificed my own happiness for the sake of others, believing that love was about selflessness. But looking back, I saw it for what it really was, a manipulation, a way to keep me small and compliant so I would never ask for more. One particular memory stood out. It was the summer before my senior year. I had been working 2 part-time jobs, struggling to make ends meet while my classmates went on vacations or spent their summer in internships. I had just managed to save enough for tuition, and I was finally able to put a little away for myself. But that was when the call came. It was my mom, sounding frantic on the other end. Sweetheart, Callie's going through a tough time again. She needs help. Can you loan her the money for her car payment? We'll pay you back, I promise. I didn't even hesitate. I didn't even ask how much or what had happened. I just agreed, transferring the money into her account without a second thought. When I found out later that the emergency had been Callie buying a new couch because she didn't like the old one, it stung. But I didn't say anything. I never did. A few months later, my parents emptied out my savings without asking, without even telling me. It was a loan, they said, a loan for my education. But it wasn't a loan. It was another way to make sure I didn't have anything left for myself. When I'd gone to the bank to check my balance, I saw the zeros, the empty space where my savings had once been. I wasn't angry, though. I was numb. I had grown accustomed to this, to always giving until there was nothing left to give. But that was the moment I realized I was trapped. My family had used me. My successes, my ability to make things work, had always been for their benefit. They had never seen me. They had never seen how hard I worked. I had always been the invisible one, the one who took the back seat, who didn't make waves. I had been giving my entire life, and all I had received in return was a life lived on the margins. I stood up, my thoughts swirling around me like a storm. I had spent so many years believing that if I gave enough, I would be loved enough. But love wasn't about giving everything away. Love was supposed to be reciprocal. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't going to give another thing to them. Not anymore. I walked over to the window and stared out at the world. It felt so much bigger than I ever gave it credit for. I wasn't just Sarah, the daughter who always gave. I was Sarah, the woman who had just started to live for herself. And for the first time, I felt proud of that. The past was behind me now. I was done sacrificing. I was done being invisible. This was my time to shine. I had spent too long in the shadows, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. The weight of exhaustion settled over me like a thick fog as I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers, empty coffee cups, and overdue bills. My last semester of college was dragging on, and between the endless essays, part-time jobs, and the constant pressure to succeed, I felt like I was suffocating. My body ached from the long hours spent on my feet at the cafe, and my mind felt like it was constantly in overdrive, trying to keep up with a world that didn't seem to care. In the midst of it all, there was Callie. Her life always seemed so much easier than mine. While I was barely scraping by, she lived comfortably in the house my parents had bought for her. She had her fancy dinners, her spa days, and the occasional charity event. She never seemed to be working as hard as I was, and yet she always had more to show for it. It grated on me, the way my sacrifices went unnoticed while hers were always praised. One evening, after a long shift at the cafe, I collapsed into bed, hoping to get a few hours of sleep before my next shift. But before I could close my eyes, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was my mother. I groaned, rolling over to check the message. "Sweetheart, we need to talk. Callie had an emergency, and we had to take all the money from your savings account. I hope you understand. We'll make sure you get it back as soon as possible. Love." Mom. I stared at the screen, the words swimming in front of my eyes. I had been saving that money for years. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was supposed to be the cushion that would get me through my final year of college. And now it was gone. Just like that. I sat up, my hands trembling as I held the phone. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, but nothing made sense. Why was it always me? Why was I always the one expected to give? The one who had to sacrifice? I had worked so hard, but in the end, it felt like it was never enough. My family took and took, and I was always left with less. Less money, less time, less of myself. I sent a quick message back, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. "Mom, I need that money back. I don't have anything left for myself. Please don't do this again." I knew it was pointless, but I needed to say something. When my phone buzzed with her reply, I was already getting dressed for work. "We had no choice, sweetheart. Callie needed it. I promise we'll take care of it. You're the strong one, remember?" The words felt like daggers, even though I knew they weren't meant to hurt. But they did. I was the strong one, the one who always had to pick up the pieces, the one who never complained, who always gave, because I believed that's what love was. I slammed the phone down, not caring that I was late for my shift. I couldn't do it anymore. The weight of everything was too much. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and mentally spent. I had spent so many years giving to my family, always thinking that if I just kept doing it, eventually they would see me. But they didn't. They never did. That night, as I worked through my shift, a thought began to grow in the back of my mind. A thought that I couldn't ignore any longer. Maybe it was time to stop giving, to stop being the one who always made sure everyone else was taken care of. Maybe it was time for me to take care of myself, for once, to stop living in the shadow of my family's expectations, and to start living for me. It wasn't an easy decision. In fact, it terrified me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep letting my family drain me dry while they took everything I had to give. The next day, I started looking for a new apartment. Finding a place of my own wasn't easy. The rent was high, and my savings were now non-existent, thanks to Callie's emergency. But I was determined. I worked double shifts, cutting back on everything I could, and within a couple of weeks, I found a place. It wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of town. But it was mine. It was a space where I could breathe, where I could be alone with my thoughts, where no one would expect anything from me. As I signed the lease, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just signing a piece of paper, I was reclaiming my life. This was the first step in breaking free from everything that had held me back for so long. The weight of the past few years, the endless sacrifices, the constant feeling of being invisible, began to lift, if only just a little. For the first time, I felt like I was making a choice that was entirely for me. When I finally moved in, I felt like a new person. The apartment was small, simple, and a little bare, but it was mine. I didn't need anything else. This was the fresh start I had been waiting for. It was time to stop sacrificing myself for a family that had never truly seen me. It was time to build my life on my terms. It had only been a couple of weeks since I moved into my new apartment, and I was still getting used to the silence. The stillness of it, once unfamiliar and almost uncomfortable, was beginning to feel like a luxury. Every corner of the space felt like a small victory. My victory. I hadn't yet invited anyone over, not even my parents, but I had imagined what it would be like. A simple visit, a chance to show them the new place without it being overshadowed by old patterns and expectations. It had been a long time since I had shared a space with my family, and I wasn't sure I was ready to go back to the same dynamic. Then my phone buzzed. At first, it was just a couple of texts. I figured maybe they were checking in, asking how I was settling in. But as I scrolled through the messages, I felt the weight of my family's assumptions hit me square in the chest. Hey, so we're all planning to come over tomorrow. I'll bring the snacks. Jeremy is so excited to see Aunt Sarah's new place. My father's message. Sounds great. We'll bring air mattresses, a few toys for the kids. Callie's packing them up now. Another message, this one from my stepmother. I read them both again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I hadn't invited anyone. In fact, I had barely mentioned anything about them coming over at all. But here they were, assuming they could just show up and stay the night. Not even a request. Not even a, can we? Just a, we will. The old patterns, they were already slipping in. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen, feeling a familiar tension coil in my stomach. They had done this before, stepped into my life, taken it over, and made it seem like their presence was a given. But this was different. This was my space, my choice. The doorbell rang, and I felt a knot form in my throat. The sound of it was like a trigger. They were here, unannounced. And just like that, I could feel the old version of myself, the one who always said yes, the one who always made room for them, flicker in the back of my mind. I opened the door, and there they were. My father wearing that confident, almost smug grin. Callie, a little too cheerful, a little too eager to make everything feel normal. Jeremy carrying his diaper bag like it was a treasure chest. Hey there, my father greeted, stepping inside before I could even respond. We thought we'd bring the kids over to see your new place, make a little family day out of it. I blinked, caught off guard by their arrival and the assumption that I had somehow invited them. I didn't, I started, but Callie was already behind my father, stepping into the apartment with a broad smile. We're so excited, she said, her voice pitched high, like it was all just a big fun surprise. She looked around the room with a practiced eye, clearly making mental notes of where she could fit in. It's such a lovely place, Sarah. You've really done well for yourself. I stood there, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The apartment, which had been a refuge for the past few weeks, now felt like it was being slowly taken from me. Where should we put the air mattresses? Callie asked, as if the question was an innocent one. But I could hear the unspoken assumption in her voice that I would just let them take over, let them invade my space. I took a deep breath, holding my ground. I didn't plan for anyone to stay, I said, my voice steady but firm. This isn't really set up for a visit. I need some time alone. My father, sensing the tension, raised an eyebrow. Come on, Sarah, don't be like this. It's just a quick visit. We're family, right? He looked at me, his eyes softening as if he were trying to guilt trip me into backing down. But I wasn't backing down this time. I crossed my arms, letting the silence hang between us for a moment. The discomfort in the air was palpable, but I refused to let it dictate my actions. No, I said firmly, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. I need this space. It's mine, and you're not invited to stay. Callie's face faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But Sarah, the kids are so excited. They wanted to see your place. We've been planning it for a while. I couldn't help but notice the way she used the kids' excitement as leverage, as if I were supposed to feel guilty for wanting to be alone. But I couldn't let her manipulate me like that anymore. I'm sorry, I said, my voice calm but resolute, but this is my time, my space, and I'm not going to let anyone walk over my boundaries anymore. My father opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I'm not going to change my mind. You can come by for a visit, but you need to respect my decision. I'm not going back to the way things were. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, and in that moment, I could see the frustration building on my father's face. But there was something else too, a quiet understanding maybe, or maybe just a recognition that I wasn't the same person I used to be. Finally, my father sighed and turned toward Callie. All right, I guess we'll just head back home. We don't want to make things awkward. Yeah, Callie said, her voice quieter now. We can always come back another time when it's better for you. I closed the door behind them, the sound of it echoing in the stillness of the apartment. I stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline leave my body. It felt like a weight had been lifted, but there was a twinge of guilt too. Old habits die hard. But I didn't let the guilt linger. Not this time. I had made my choice. I was done bending to their expectations. This was my life, my space, and I would no longer apologize for protecting it. I sat back down on the couch, letting the quiet of the apartment fill me up once again. It was mine. It was my choice. And for the first time, it felt like I was in control. I could breathe. The tension in the air was palpable as I sat across from my father and Callie at my kitchen table. They had arrived uninvited again, this time with an agenda much more serious than a casual visit. The mortgage papers were laid out in front of me, an unspoken challenge I could feel in every nerve. We need your help, Sarah, my father started, his voice deceptively calm. His usual charm was absent, replaced by a forced sincerity I wasn't buying. Callie and I are looking to buy a new house. We found the perfect place, but there's a small issue. We need someone to co-sign the loan. I stared at the papers in front of me, my stomach churning. The request wasn't a surprise. It was the same pattern, the same expectation. My family asking for everything without ever considering what I needed. I forced myself to look up, meeting my father's eyes. I don't think I can help with that. Callie's eyes widened. But Sarah, she said, her voice suddenly a little too sweet, a little too pleading, we wouldn't ask if we weren't in a bind. We know you've always been there for us. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, always been there for them. They never saw me, never saw what it had cost me to be their support system. How many times had I emptied my pockets for them, only to be left feeling invisible? I can't, I repeated, my voice firm now. I'm not your safety net anymore. I've given enough. There was a long pause. My father's expression shifted, frustration creeping into his voice. You're being unreasonable, Sarah. This is family. Family helps each other. You know how important this is. I felt a rush of anger, and I leaned forward, my hands clenched on the table. You've never seen me as family, Dad. You've seen me as your ATM. I've helped you out. I've supported you, and you never once acknowledged what I've sacrificed. You've never even considered what I need. His face reddened, his anger flaring. That's not fair, Sarah. We've always supported you. No, I shot back. You've used me. You've taken everything I've had and never once asked if I needed anything. Do you have any idea how that feels? To give everything and have nothing left for yourself? Callie shifted in her chair, her voice softer now, but still carrying the edge of manipulation. We're just asking for a little help. You're doing so well for yourself. You're in a great place now. Don't you want to share some of that? It was a tactic they had used before. Guilt, manipulation, the weight of their expectations. But it wasn't working anymore. No, I said, my voice unwavering. I'm not going to co-sign for you. I'm not going to save you anymore. I've given enough. I've worked too hard for too long to keep enabling this. My father's face twisted, the anger boiling over. You're being selfish. You're acting like you've done everything on your own. You didn't get here alone. We've helped you. We've supported you, and now you're turning your back on us. I felt the sting of his words, but they no longer had the power to break me, not anymore. Maybe you helped me, I said, my voice steady. But I was never asking for your help. You made me believe I had to keep giving, that it was my job to take care of everyone. But I'm not doing that anymore. I saw the realization hit him, and it wasn't the relief I had expected. It was anger. They didn't want to lose their safety net. They didn't want to face the consequences of their own actions. Fine, my father said, his voice low and tight with rage. But don't come running to us when you realize you've made a mistake. I met his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't back down. I won't. I'm done. Callie stood up, her posture stiff. She said nothing, but the look she gave me spoke volumes. I could see the disappointment, the frustration that I wasn't playing along with their game. She had always been the one to manipulate the situation, to make me feel guilty for wanting something for myself. But today, I wasn't going to let her win. They left without another word. My father's parting shot was a sharp glare, and Callie's was a quiet, resentful sigh as she followed him out the door. I stood there, watching them go, and for the first time, I felt a sense of liberation. It was like the final thread that had been holding me in place had snapped. I was free. The weight that had pressed on my chest for so long was gone, and though I felt the sting of their anger, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had stood up for myself, drawn the line, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, breathing deeply, letting the silence settle around me. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I had taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. It wasn't easy. It would never be easy, especially when it came to family. But I was learning to put myself first, and that was something I had never done before. I sat in the stillness of my apartment, letting the quiet wash over me. It had been a few days since my family left, and the silence, which had once been uncomfortable, now felt like a warm blanket wrapping around me. I had never realized how loud my life had been, filled with demands, expectations, and the constant need to prove myself. But now, with nothing but the hum of the fridge and the occasional sound of traffic from outside, I could hear myself think. And for the first time in a long time, I liked what I heard. My space was mine, fully and completely. There were no more family members walking in uninvited, no more guilt trips, no more feeling like I had to be everything for everyone else. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. But there was something else I had to face, the fact that I wasn't just living here in this apartment. I was learning to live for myself. I was learning to stop giving so much of myself to people who never truly saw me. As I sat there reflecting on the changes in my life, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, recognizing Callie's name on the screen. I hesitated, but only for a moment. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed a simple reply. "Hey, Callie, what's up?" A few minutes later, a message appeared. "I wanted to reach out, Sarah. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, and I realize I owe you an apology. I know I've made things harder for you in ways I never acknowledged. I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time. I hadn't expected an apology. In fact, I had braced myself for more of the same, more manipulation, more guilt. But this was different. I put my phone down and let the words sink in. It wasn't the grand gesture I had imagined, but it was real. A simple, sincere apology. No strings attached, just an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, Callie had seen me for the first time. I thought about it for a while, unsure of how to respond. I wasn't ready to forgive everything, not yet, but I could feel a shift in me, a quiet understanding that maybe there was room for something different between us. It wasn't going to be easy, but it felt like the first step towards something new, something better. "Thank you, Callie," I typed back. "That means more than you know. I don't know if we're ready to fix everything, but I appreciate you reaching out." There was a pause before her response came through. "I understand. I just wanted to let you know I'm here, whenever you're ready." A wave of relief washed over me. For the first time, Callie wasn't asking for something in return. She wasn't expecting me to fix things for her or to be the one who made everything right. She was simply offering a hand, quietly acknowledging the weight of everything that had passed between us. Later that day, I sat with the idea of inviting her over. It felt like a strange but necessary step. We had spent so many years in a tense, often uncomfortable space, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to try again, on a different foundation. I didn't want to rush it, but I also didn't want to close myself off completely. When the doorbell rang a few days later, I was nervous, but ready. I opened the door to find Callie standing there, her posture a little more relaxed than I remembered, her face softer. She smiled gently as she stepped inside, a quiet acknowledgement of the changes between us. "I brought coffee," she said, holding out a small bag from the cafe down the street. "Thought we could start with something simple." I smiled, feeling a bit of the old tension lift. "I'd like that," I said. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was a start, a real, genuine start. We sat down at my small dining table, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. It was strange, but not in the way I had expected. There was no guilt, no awkwardness, just two people trying to move forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in that moment, that was enough. So, how have you been? She asked after a while, her tone gentle, as if she was trying to navigate the conversation carefully, but with real interest. I've been good, I said, feeling the truth of it as I spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of learning. I'm still figuring it out, but I think I'm on the right path. Callie nodded slowly, her eyes soft. I can see that. I'm proud of you, Sarah. You've always been stronger than I gave you credit for. It was the first time I had ever heard those words from her, and I didn't realize how much I had needed to hear them until now. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, the weight of the past few weeks settling more comfortably on my shoulders. I appreciate that, I said quietly, meeting her gaze, and I'm trying to be okay with that. With me. We sat there for a while, the conversation flowing easily, no longer clouded by the weight of old expectations or the tension that had once filled every interaction between us. Slowly, piece by piece, the walls between us began to soften. As the afternoon passed, I realized something important. This was no longer about fixing the past. It was about creating something new. It was about the space between us and how we could fill it with something healthier, something more genuine. When Callie left that day, I felt lighter, like the first chapter of my new life was truly beginning. And it wasn't just about living on my own anymore. It was about learning how to rebuild relationships, starting with the one I had with myself. I didn't know what the future held or how the dynamics with my family would evolve, but for the first time, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. And I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me. It had been a few weeks since Callie and I had sat down to talk, and in that time, everything had begun to shift. Slowly, the edges of the tension between us started to soften, though I didn't expect miracles. Change was a long road, and I was just beginning to take the first steps. The apartment, once so stark and unfamiliar, had transformed along with me. The walls, which had been bare and cold, were now filled with small touches that made the space feel like home. I had repainted the living room a soft, calming blue, something that felt warm and welcoming, something that reflected the peace I was starting to feel inside. The space was no longer a symbol of my isolation. It was mine, fully and truly, and it was where I was finally learning to be myself. Callie had reached out a few times since that day we sat together, but each time it was on her terms, simple check-ins, no expectations, no demands. For the first time, she wasn't trying to fix things or manipulate me into being the person she thought I should be. It was refreshing, but also unsettling. I wasn't used to this version of her. I wasn't used to her treating me like I mattered, just for who I was. A week after our first conversation, she texted again. I'd like to come by and see how things are going, if that's okay with you. No pressure, just wanted to check in. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I wasn't sure what I expected from her, but I felt a pull to let her in. I'd like that. Come over tomorrow. The next day, when she knocked on the door, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety twist in my stomach, but it was different this time. I wasn't bracing for the old dynamic, the one where she expected me to bend and give and make things easy. This was a visit with no strings attached, a chance to just be, without the weight of expectations. She smiled as I opened the door, and for the first time, it felt like a genuine smile. Hey, she said, holding out a small box of pastries from a local bakery. I brought something, thought it might be nice to share. I let out a small laugh, surprised by the gesture. That's kind of you. We sat down at the small dining table I'd bought after I moved in, and the conversation flowed easily, the way it never had before. There were no power plays, no attempts to control the conversation or steer it in a direction that suited her. We talked about the little things, how I was adjusting to living on my own, how she was adjusting to the idea of me being independent. There was no pressure, no guilt. Just two people, sitting and talking like we were equals. As we sipped our coffee, Callie's voice softened, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing her for who she was. Not the stepmother, not manipulative figure I had grown up with, but someone who was still trying to figure herself out, just like me. I want to apologize, Sarah, she said, her tone sincere, for everything, for not seeing you, for making you feel like you always had to be the one to take care of everything. I'm sorry for that. I blinked, surprised by the rawness in her voice. It's okay, I said, though I wasn't sure if it really was. I know it wasn't easy for you either. No, it wasn't. But that doesn't excuse how I treated you. I can see now that I took so much from you without ever really acknowledging what you needed. I think I thought you were stronger than you were, that you could handle it all. I was wrong. Her words felt like a weight lifting from my chest. In that moment, I realized something. Callie wasn't perfect. She wasn't the villain I had painted her to be in my head. She was human. And for the first time, I was able to accept her apology, not as a way to fix everything, but as a way to acknowledge that we both had flaws, and that was okay. I appreciate that, Callie, I said quietly. It means a lot. We sat there for a while, the conversation drifting from deep reflections to lighthearted banter. It was a rare moment of peace between us where we could just be. And though I knew the road ahead would have its bumps, this moment felt like a beginning of something new, something that didn't depend on old patterns. When Callie left that evening, I felt lighter. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of years of resentment on my shoulders. She had acknowledged her mistakes, and I had acknowledged mine. There was a quiet understanding between us, and for the first time, it felt like we were on equal footing. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee alone in the silence of my apartment, I realized something important. This was how things were meant to be. Not perfect, but real. Not defined by the past, but by what we chose to make of it. I wasn't just rebuilding my relationship with Callie, I was rebuilding my life. And that life didn't need to be perfect to be mine. It just needed to be honest. As the days passed, I started to see glimpses of my family shifting. Slowly, but surely. My mother came by for a visit one afternoon, and instead of coming with expectations or demands, she simply sat with me, asked how I was doing, and listened. There was no guilt, no pressure, just a quiet connection. Later, Callie and I shared a small dinner with her kids and a neighbor, and it was the first time in a long while that I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. No justifications, no apologies, just simple, honest connection. As the evening wore on, I realized that I was no longer the person who had to fight for a place at the table. I was finally at peace with where I was, both with my family and with myself. And that was enough. My apartment, once a symbol of isolation, was now a place of healing, a place where love, though imperfect, could grow. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged, not because I had earned it, but because I was learning to accept it.